Right, so before we move on to building some high seas decks, right? We gotta kind of put a pin in Max, right? Because I've been having a blast with him, and obviously Mech does feature in high seas, and what Mech is bringing to the table is very interesting, but also a tad confusing, right? Because it really opens up the doors as to what Mech can do, but also closes the door on boost in some sense. So I thought, why don't we dive into it, see what we can come up with? We might do a game or two. If it feels decent enough, right, then we'll stick with Max for a little bit. Otherwise, we'll move to Puffin. So when it comes to Max and this whole new cog, right, environment, if we compare them to say Dash.io and Puffin Hightail, right, we have Crank to draw as Puffin, which is just good, right? And then we have Crank for action points as Dash.io, right? You're playing from the top of your deck, so you're converting Cranks to action points. Then as Max, well, it's Crank to swing, so in the sense of cogs, we wouldn't really be playing Max for hyperdrivers. We'd be playing Max simply to take Banksy as our weapon, right? So that we throw a cog out, we can then crank it, we can swing with Banksy and put a steam counter on our cogs and upkeep the cogs, right? Now, this is already a step behind Puffin, who can convert gold to cogs. So, yeah, so far not looking too great, but still, it is a very, very interesting package. And I guess the big question is, how much of boost and hyperdrivers do we actually cut out of Max, right? Do we lean full into just Banksy and Cogs, or is there some happy middle ground, right? And that's what we really have to investigate. So, general playline, right? We boost, we can then max to create a hyperdriver. Hyperdrivers can now crank as max, and then we get to swing Banksy, right? So if we change that up to cogs, it does nice and easily replace, right? We can still boost, we could then create cogs, crank them, and swing, right? We don't need to use Max's ability, and Max's ability in general is not a really great value, right? So if we compare hyperdrivers to cogs just in the sense of resource conservation, right? So not factoring again for puff and cogs draw, so that's point value there, but instead just their usefulness, right? So hyperdriver, you boost, you take a steam counter off, you gain a resource. Cog, well, there's cog interaction cards, so we will count them, right? And they generally go again or a +1. So for instance, a blue hyperdriver, you're paying 1 to then store 1 resource to get back when you boost. So its value is 0, right? Token hyperdriver, you're paying 2 for 2 steam counters, so it's still 0, right? Yellow, we're finally in the positive. We're paying 1 for 2 steam counters, so it's 1. And then red, we're paying 1 for 3, so it's 2. So compare that to our cogs, right? A golden cog starts with 1 steam counter, but unlike hyperdrive, it's not destroyed when there are no steam counters left on it. It is destroyed at upkeep, right, if you cannot remove a steam counter. So no matter what, that's 2 turns of use out of our golden cog, potentially. And for our copper cog, at 2 steam counters, it's 3 turns. So already the blue pitch copper cog definitely outvalues the hyperdrivers, right? The hyperdrivers that we're trying to fish out of our deck, even in the sake of red to blue, if we are, again, maximizing our synergy and utilizing the cog tap to buff X card every single turn. So then what about with max and cranking? Well, cranking means we're removing a steam counter, so everything gets a -1. This is where blue hyperdrivers go in the bin because they're now not usable, right? You could throw it out as a crank. You're paying 1 to crank to swing, so then I guess it's equivalent to Max's ability, but you're losing card from hand. So yeah, no, blue hyperdrivers just not that great. Token hyperdrivers, although they stick around, again, it's that pesky pay 2 to make it that is what I find problematic, right? It should really be pay 1, or again, some sort of mechanic where it costs more depending on how many hyperdrives you actually control. But generally speaking, because we're paying 2, we're cranking, removing 1 steam counter, leaving it with 1 steam counter that we can then use to generate a resource once we boost later on. It has a value of still -1. Our yellow, 0, right? Because we're paying 1, moving 1 steam counter, leaving 1 steam counter. And then red is still in the positive. And then for our cogs, so we just -1 turn from them. But again, it's not till upkeep that it's destroyed. So golden cog, even if you crank it, you get it for your turn. You technically get it for your opponent's turn if you want to use it for something, right? Like galvanize. And then on your next turn is when it actually gets destroyed. Which is also a little relevant because there are cards that capitalize off of an item being destroyed on your turn. Same with our copper cogs, right? It's just 1 extra steam counter or 1 extra turn. So generally speaking, if we were going to try and make this work in Max, my mentality goes towards, well, the golden cogs, the token hyperdrivers, since it's just inbuilt in Max, our red hyperdrivers, and our blue copper cogs, right? So then what about the actual cards that synergize with our cogs? So We have cards like Tough Old Wrench and Teeth of the Cog, which allow us to galvanize and convert an item on board to a golden cog, or in a sense, convert one spent cog to a new cog, which can definitely be relevant. In Puffin, they're a lot better because you can crank, and if you crank twice on your opponent's turn, you get a card back. But as Max, you probably don't want to crank them on your opponent's turn. There is absolutely no benefit. But there's still decent blues for us to take if it wasn't for that 2 block, right? I really, really wish they had galvanized, and it could be as specific as Golden Skywarden, where if you galvanize a golden cog, it gets +1 block, and any other item it stays at 2. But I just, oh God, I really don't like them as just 2 block. They're built for Puffin, not really anyone else, it seems like, right? Our Goldwing Turbine at 2 cost. Next Mech Knowledge attack this turn gets +3, and create a golden cog token with 3 blocks. That is definitely a nice buff card. Gets a little bit iffy, again, because the cost basis in Max. So if it was like a 1 + 2, yeah. But no, at a 2 cost, it does get a little bit rough. Because again, getting that cog doesn't get us to half a new card in Puffin. So it's another case of where this kind of feels like it was built for Puffin. Copper Cog, right? Blue, again, outvalues the other hype drivers, so it's just fantastic. Literally, my brain just goes, cut the 3 yellow, the 3 blue hyperdrive, and just make it 6 copper cogs, right? That's the easiest starting point for our max deck. Cogworks Workshop, 1 cost, create a golden cog, put a steam counter on up to 2 cogs you control. So essentially, it pays for itself because you crank the golden cog, and then you put a steam counter back on it, but then also allows you to prolong 1 other cog for 1 extra turn. If this was put steam counters on 2 items you control, it would be absolutely fantastic in Max, but it's still decent, right? Again, as we're trying to shift towards cogs. And then Cog in the Machine is the golden one, right? Our low cog tank. Create 2 golden cogs. You may tap a cog you control if you do put this on the bottom of its owner's deck. Now, I would love to use this with Max Nitro, and there is a case for that as well, right? If you stick to Mechnologist equipment, chess gets a little bit rough because Teklo Foundry card you want to be boosting, but you could, in essence, take a cog deck that barely boosts and therefore has a much greater chance of landing Nitro, and then Cog in the Machine goes towards Nitro, right? Less boosts means you're most likely prolonging your hyperdrivers as well, so there is merit to that side of the coin, but otherwise just an action point generator is definitely useful, right? There's the Cog cards that are either +1 or go again, right? It's an easy way to just take the +1, because you don't need to go again if you have the action point. Weapon Swing, just rearranging the turn from, again, that boost, crank, swing, to, again, swing into something else is definitely really, really good, right? We need high octane, and this is as close as we're getting. So, yeah, Cog in the Machine definitely works no matter whatever you're aiming for, right? And then for the actual payoffs, we have Tighten the Screws as a +4 to a Mechnologist attack, which can, of course, hit Banksy, so that's really good. And you may untap a cog you control. So the awkward situation there is if we're untapping a cog we control to then go into Banksy with the +4, well, we're not really going to be using the cog. So most likely this lands on something that can actually utilize the cog, but otherwise just a +4 to Banksy is still nice, right? Gigawart was taken and it didn't have the untap. So either way, this is just, a straight upgrade to that. Cogworks Dovetail, when this hits a hero, untap all cogs you control, thrice per turn instance, tap cog you control to give this +1 or go again. So this is just a better version of the common one, right? So you have the 2 once per turn instant tap a cog for +1 or go again. The 0 cost Cloud Skimmer, and then Cloud something. Majority of them are Cloud, right? But that was a 1 cost, essentially the same stats without the on-hit effect, and again, only once per turn instant. I don't run it in the deck because Cogworks Dovetail is just the better version, right? Cloud City Steamboat, when this hits here, you may tap cog you control if you do put a steam counter on a cog you control. So basically just shift from 1 cog to prolonging another cog. Twice per turn instant tap cog control to give this +1. So it gets a little bit awkward again because sequencing, right? And Banksy being what we really want to end our turn with, because we're trying to prolong those cogs, since again, we don't have the easier way to rebuild them, right? Through someone, say Puffin, right? Cogworks Zeppelin, when this hits here, you may tap a cog you control if you do create a golden cog, and then twice per turn, tap a cog you control to give this +1. So similar to our Cloud City Steamboat, but rather than the steam counter, it's cog to cog, right? Which is essentially equivalent, right? Except in the scenario where we can actually crank it to give Cogworks Zeppelin in that sense go again, right? Which makes it a little bit nicer. And then our Sentry, when this defends, you may tap a cog you control if you do create a golden cog token. So this, as a block card, then again allows us to convert a cog that will be destroyed at our upkeep to a fresh cog, is definitely really, really nice. So the main thing to look at, right, is these three cards. We have Jumpstart, Zipper Hit, and there we go, Cloud Skiff. I knew I had it somewhere, right? So all of these are essentially 1/5 go again, right? With a little bit of tweaking. So Zipper Hit is the comparison that we really want to make, right? So a nice big boost card that is always taken. So 1 for 5, boost to give a go again, right? Jumpstart becomes a 1 for 5 with boost if we control Hyperdriver. And then if we do control Hyperdriver, it means we're also getting the resource from that Hyperdriver. So that is nice in some aspect, but in other aspects, it's going to destroy our Hyperdriver and then prevent other cards that if you control Hyperdriver, which is where the Hyperdriver sort of package kind of falls apart, right? In that scenario where everything wants the Hyperdriver to buff it, but then if you're destroying your Hyperdrivers, they're not getting their benefit anymore, right? So it's really only 1 to 2, right? Cloud Skip, once per turn instant, tap cog control. This gets +1 or go again. So again, similarly to Jumpstart, if we control a cog, this now has go again. So it's a 1 for 5, but it's more flexible because it can be a 1 for 6, right? So yeah, straight away, the cog stuff already looks better than the Hyperdriver stuff, right? But Hyperdriver is also a big package of other really good usable mech stuff. So right, Teklo Foundry Art is the big one. Once per turn action. Pay 1, banish the top 2 cards of your deck, gain 1 resource for each acknowledged card, banish this way. Activate this ability only if you have boosted this turn. Go again and Battle Worn 2. So, obviously you need to boost in order to be able to use our Teklo Foundry Art. So to me, the question isn't, do we cut out boost, right, and do cogs and generics? It's how little boost can we get away with, right? Because ideally, we want to be aiming for, say, 1 boost a turn so we can still benefit from something like Teklo Foundry Art. But even at 1 boost a turn, we then look at some of these other cards, like BIOS Update. Next action card you boost this turn gains +3, so that has to hit a boosting card. And then the next time an acknowledged item with 2 or less is banished to pay a boost cost this turn, put it into the arena. So the more we're boosting in a turn, the more chances we have to trigger BIOS Update, right? Maximum Velocity, you have to boost 3 times in order to get a 2 for 10, which is, again, just big stats. And then we have Pulse Wave Harpoon as a really good hand disruption card. But again, if we're cutting out boosts to the bare minimum, right, aiming for 3 boosts a turn to make Pulse Wave Harpoon, sorry, 2 boosts a turn, since Pulse Wave Harpoon itself has boost, is less likely to occur. So does the cog package outcompete these cards? Or again, is there a fringe way for us to connect the dots? And that's what we really have to look into. So let's take a look at my current running guess at the deck, if you will. Okay, so I'm starting from what should be the most recent deck for Max that we've gone through on the channel, right? If you've been following along with the Max stuff, so it is not a Nitro deck, right? It takes quality equipment, if you will, rather than just the full set of mech stuff so that we can Nitro. And then it was generally geared as just a straight aggro deck. So all I've done is cut the cards I think should be cut if we're not leaning into hyperdrivers and boosting as much. And then the cog stuff that I think I'd like to throw in, right? With some little tweaks because of what we just discussed. Because basically, I built this before I started recording, right? So the one that did not click for me was the action point generation on hit, right? The Zeppelin. So Zeppelin's a bit better than what I was thinking, so that should be in the inventory. Probably instead of the Pelletier, right? I was taking the Pelletier since it's a 6, and I'm cutting out the Infused Titanium and the Throttles, which were basically a way to try and negate Prism. I'm still taking a full 80 card deck because we're still boosting, we're still milling with Teklo Foundry Art, hopefully. But the general idea here, right? God, I don't actually want to delete this. I'm gonna. Is basically we want a blue, a boost, a cog, a turn, right? So hopefully this kind of accomplishes that, right? So yeah, the cut cards of Jumpstart, because again, if we're not consistently having a Hyperdriver, and we will still, again, try to create a Hyperdriver where we can, and piggyback off of the resources when we can, right? Again, it helps out with Banksy. It feeds into creating a new Hyperdriver to then still be able to swing with Banksy. So it does close a lot of gaps. So it's still taking the red Hyperdrivers and trying to just max when possible, if it's needed, if we don't have the cog, but it's more of a safety net, a fallback, if you will. So yeah, with that in mind, Jumpstart as a 2 for 5 boost is definitely not good, right? So Jumpstart's out, Throttle's out, just because, again, we're taking, in my opinion, better cards through the cogs, hopefully, right? And Infused Titanium, it was, again, mainly there as a popper. 4 block, which was nice, but I guess it's gone. And then hyper scrappers, if we're not hitting all the hyperdrivers, that's definitely not needed. The hyperdriver equipment, again, if we're not taking all the hyperdrivers, definitely not needed. Steel Street Hoons, right? Again, we're cutting block a bit and relying on, I guess, just more threes, more stuff that we could throw out, right? A little bit of salvage from equipment. So yeah, we're down on the defensive side. We're down on the aggro side because there is a lot of big stuff for cogs too. So it's a lot to try and squeeze into a deck, and part of me just wants to go cogs and generics, right? But then the more I look into generics, again, there's lots of good payoff cards. There's not a great amount of starters, right? Because again, Banksy is our closer. So, unless there's a whole bunch of good go against stuff for aggro, it's basically a big card, Banksy, in which case the cog stuff definitely works, right? Again, a 2/6, that could be a 2, potentially 8, right? That then gets us an action point to then still go into Banksy. It's definitely really, really nice. But overall, right? So, keeping the penetration scripts, just because I need more yellows. Items in total. So, I've only done 3 copper cogs because I think there's enough cog generation from elsewhere, right? We have Cogworks Workshop, so count them like this. 3, 6. I kind of want to count this as 2, but we'll go 9, right? So we have 9 cogs, which is already 3 more than the hyperdrivers, but beautifully, Cog in the Machine and obviously Cogworks Workshop can be blocked with, which is just better, right? Than obviously an item that can't block. But if I was going to make a tweak, it'd probably be the penetration scripts to more copper cogs, potentially, right? Sentry, if we have a cog, helps. It's where the Galvanize is a little bit better, because again, if we make a token hyperdriver, we can junk it with Galvanize and convert it to a cog. But hopefully it's enough. And then, of course, the payoffs. So tying the screws, even if we don't have the cog or we can't make use of the cog that we do on tap, it's still +4 to Banksy, which should be nice enough. Because I do think Banksy putting a Steam counter on cogs is more value than Banksy just salvaging its own resource, right? By way of hyperdriver. Still putting it on a penetration script or a clamp press to me is a little bit better, unless we really need the cogs for the go again. Because we are taking our Sky Simmers, right, as essentially our mock 0 to 60s. If we have cogs, right? So Sky Simmer with a cog, 0-4, go again. Yellow, 0-3, go again. Same with the 0 to 60. Still taking T-Bones. Questionable, right? Why did I put that in the deck? Oops, because I really, really want to keep it. I don't know if we get to 3 cogs enough to make Pelletier really worth it, right? I think 1, definite, so for the go again stuff, or just a slight buff, sure. But, 2, we can have those burst turns through, like, Tinker Rings, but stabilizing at 3, depends, again, how much the opponent lets Banksy through on stockpiling. But, yeah. Overall, Heist still works because we're still boosting, right? I haven't got too much boost. Make boost cards in total 1, so 3, 6. I guess we count them as well. 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 22, 25, 28, 31. So technically, we should be getting 2, right? A turn, which again, sort of makes Pulse Wave Harpoon a little bit awkward. It becomes, rather than a play straight away, to a card that we need to Arsenal to really get its payoff. So that's maybe a bit of a problem. Maybe we cut Pulse Wave Harpoon and we just put Pelletier in. It's another set of 6s for Prism, so that's kind of nice, right? But we also want cards like Fast and Furious to still work, where we boost it away and we get the Steam counter from it. We obviously want Heist to be able to hit some stuff, so boosting items, right? So I think it's a good mix. Overall, we're actually less items overall, right? Because it's only 3, 6, 9, 12 with the hyperdrivers rather than 15 when I was taking all the hyperdrivers. So we cut out 3 items, which should help with the block side of things. So overall, I think it's functional. I'll link it in the description, but obviously we have to start playing it and testing it and then tweaking it as we go. But yeah, I do think cogs in total. I mean, we can quickly take a look at, the actual hyperdriver cards. And again, the big issue is, relying on, say, the token from Max to keep them going. You're losing it every time you do the first boost. So Bulma no longer has Overpower. Big Bertha, nope. Is there any? Is there really that? Is there not that many? Quickfire loses its resource unless it's played first. Rev Up loses its discount, right? Yeah, no. So I'm looking into these as just now, because obviously none of them have really ever been taken, aside from, I think Jumpstart, I think Rev Ups have been taken. But yeah, cogs are better. Cogs are just straight better, because again, if need be, we move to just cogs and then generics, and you take like Command and Conquer and Line Strike, and at that point, there's no point in playing Max because again, we're relying on his ability less, so that's already strike one. We cut Banksy, then there's no point because that's still the other big point to argue is are the actual other weapons just better, right? Even like Dash IO, they lean heavy into just a whole bunch of blue cogs as their main item. Is this better than Symbiosis, right? Potentially. Potentially the Spitfire, right? Yeah, Spitfire. Well, no, because you have to untap Spitfire, whereas Symbiosis Shot, you just have to generate the extra points. So no, Symbiosis Shot for Dash IO is still going to be marginally better. But yeah, we'll call this a starting point, right? I'll probably try a few games, and then we'll see where it goes, and we might just jump ship to Puffin, right? And then, of course, we need to work on Death Dealer Marlin before Azalea goes. But yeah, let me know what you think. Are you sticking with Max? You jump to Puffin? Because Max he's been pretty popular, right? You guys seem to like Max and the videos for Max. And again, like looking through the statistics on Fabry here, he's the top of the bottom, so to speak, right? So yeah, very interested to see how our cogs work. I will link it like this if you're interested in the before and after for a little bit, right? Because you queue up, just select all the inventory, right? Anyway, leave it there. Hope you enjoyed. Yeah.